Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast in association with Charles Tyrwhitt. Christmas has come and gone, but you can still use the code Wisden22 to get 20% off at Charles Tyrwhitt. So check out their website for their range of polo shirts, knitwear, outerwear and much more. Anyway, on with the show. I hope you've all had a lovely Christmas. This is our last episode of the year. As ever, we'll be running through the big stories from the last week, which includes a handful of test matches, a couple of England squads, and an IPL auction. We'll also be sharing our moments of the year as we look back an extraordinary 12 months in English men's cricket in particular. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today is Mark Butcher, Joe Harman, and Phil Walker. Phil, did any of your Christmas presents top Dan Lawrence's return to the England Test squad for that tour of New Zealand that's coming up soon?
All my dreams came at once. Yes, that. But I'm delighted for him. He's gonna enjoy his little pay packet and wearing a fluorescent bib for a couple of months. You know, look, in all seriousness, I'm quite surprised, but sort of thrilled for him really, because I didn't think he was quite so near to the inner sanctum. I thought that his stock may have fallen somewhat. So now that was a joyous Yuletide result for me and for the boy himself. He does play in a very Stokesian kind of way, I suppose. There's a bit of dash and devil about him, so perhaps it's not quite so unusual a selection or left fielder selection as it may have initially appeared. I can imagine that the selflessness of Dan Lawrence and the cocksureness, if that's even a word, of Dan Lawrence may well appeal to this new broom. But we shall see. But certainly that perked me up in the build-up to our Utah celebrations. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, there'll be people wondering that, you know, he didn't have a very good year for Essex, had a couple of injuries. He didn't really seem that close to the squad, but that Caribbean tour isn't actually that long ago, and he would have shown the people, Stokes in particular, something that I'm sure they'd have liked. But there's no Rehan Ahmed in the squad. He obviously had that amazing debut a week or so ago. He's been stood down as England manage his winter. He's due to play in the new UAE-based T20 league in January, and there's a decent chance that we picked in the England white ball squad that's going to Bangladesh in March. Are you broadly okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that because he's playing meaningful, high pressure cricket. I would have been less okay with that had that not been the case. But given the options that abound for players, particularly players of his type around the world, it was always going to be the case that he'd have something else to do. So yeah, I'm more than happy with that. It wouldn't have. I don't think it would have been the worst thing in the world for him to have been on the New Zealand tour either. You know, even if on the England played 5 seamers down there. I think the last time they were in New Zealand. So spin not likely to play a massive part, but you never know. Jack Leach might dive and bang his head again, and suddenly he finds himself in an 11. So if that had happened, I would have been happy with that as well. So let's put it this way: the England hierarchy can do no wrong at this moment. It doesn't matter what they do. It's all brilliant. It's brilliant. Christmas is brilliant.
Joe, the other name that stood out for me was Ollie Stone. He's fit again. Mark Wood's been rested, so if Stone's body is up for it, he could play a massive role on this tour, having not played that much for England recently, or played much for anyone recently.
Yeah, that's always a very big if with Ollie Stone, though, isn't it? I mean, obviously he's a hugely exciting cricketer. Only have to think back to that tour of India where he played. Was it the first test or the second test where he just bowled an electric opening spell, and suddenly you could see this is why England want to give him every possible chance, and they've continued to do that, but unfortunately just can't get on the park. So at this stage, it's still nothing much more than potential and hope and optimism, because I actually don't know when the last time he played a first-class game, but it was certainly not recently. Having said that, Mark Wood hadn't played any first-class cricket for a long time before he turned up in Pakistan and bowled like the wind, and was a huge part of that series win. So it's not impossible. And England obviously think very, very highly of him. You kind of feel like he needs a few county wickets behind him before he gets another chance, but you know, never know. We'll see. Express pace in New Zealand is obviously useful. It's not necessarily the way New Zealand have won matches there. But in the absence of Woods, who it seems like a sensible time to rest him, I think, given his exploits over the last few months, then you can see they want a like-for-like replacement, and Stone, if they can get him on the park, is the closest they can get to that.
I do reckon that one of the things that was always a massive feature of Australian cricket through their sort of halcyon days of the 90s early 2000s, was the fact that most of their sort of gun players expended very, very little energy in first class cricket, hardly any at all. All of their overs were bowled, if they were bowled at all, were bowled playing test matches or playing, international stuff. So, I mean, as Mark Wood has kind of proven, you'd rather him play two and a half glorious test matches as a test player than play 2 warm-up matches and half a test match. Because basically it's a little bit like when you get older and the amount of units that you consume are limited. So you want to have the nicest ones you can possibly get down your neck rather than wasting your time with special brew. You know what I mean? It's kind of, and if Ollie Stone kind of has a sort of like some sort of sparkler, plays 1 test match, takes 5 for bowls like the wind, and then isn't seen again until the summer, then so be it. I reckon. I don't think that's a massive problem either.
They've also got 6 test matches in England, and I know it's kind of heresy, isn't it, to look too far ahead into the Ashes thing, but that's the reality of it. That first test match against Ireland, it begins on June 1st, and then 2 weeks later, it's the first of 5 test matches, basically back to back in England. Obviously, mouth-watering series are coming up, but England need a battery of quicks. So if Ollie Stone can play one of those games or 2 of those games, then that obviously helps Mark Wood's chances of playing 3 of those games. And obviously you have the Anderson and Broad management as well. So it makes sense. But even when England's selections don't immediately make sense, and they come to make sense. So I think we have to doff our cap to this one, I think, really. And Stone is somebody that they like. Whenever he is halfway fit, they bring him in. And you can absolutely understand why. So with Archer as well, back in the ODI side, I don't know if you'll probably come to that in a minute, Yas, but it does feel like with some inevitable forks in the road coming up and bumps in the road coming up, nonetheless, it does feel like they are developing this coherent bunch of international quality cricketers, and they're going to need at least 16, 17 of them come June next year.
Just to jump in there quickly on Stone, his last first-class match was the Edgbaston Test against New Zealand in June 2021. So that really does show the size of the punt they're taking here, but I obviously think it's one worth risking.
Elsewhere in that squad, Matt Potts and Stuart Broad are back in the mix. Will Jacks is still around. There's no Keaton Jennings or Jamie Overton, who both toured Pakistan without playing. 2 names that I thought of who are not in the squad, but I feel quite sorry for at the end of this year, and you wonder how the year could have gone if circumstances were different. Well, 1, Saqib Mahmood, and 2, Matt Parkinson. On Mahmood, it feels like a very long time ago, but he debuted in the Caribbean and straight away looked really, really good. And he's played 1 game of cricket since that tour. And as well as Potts did in the summer, Mahmood starts that summer in the England side if he's fit. Mahmood turns 26 in February and has still only played 28 first-class games. In the last couple of years, whenever he's played ODI cricket, he's looked really good there as well. He would have been part of the World Cup plans if fit. And then with Parkinson as well, massive favourite on this podcast, and he had that brief taste of Test cricket in the summer. But I feel like people made up their minds on him very quickly, and we've talked before about how difficult it can be being in the England setup, getting dropped, and then expected to perform at your very best as soon as you've left the England setup and you're back into county cricket. And a lot of very good players have struggled after being dropped. And I think also with the more you watch leg spinners around the world at the moment, leg spinners are really, really different to each other. He's very different to Rehan Ahmed. He's slower through the air, but he's got a much bigger leg break. He bowls very long spells, which you don't necessarily associate with leg spinners. And I'm not saying he should have played loads of cricket for England this year, but in a different universe, if he plays in the Caribbean, I do wonder what his year would have looked like. And I think it's a bit of a shame to see how the years have gone for those 2 young guys from Lancashire.
It definitely is, but I mean, they're still young enough to come again. We're obviously not writing them off here, but it's also a good sign for English cricket, right? That these names can almost disappear so quickly because there are so many other players out there. This is not often that England have a new leg spinner come through, so they don't have to think about the previous one. I mean, we're in kind of uncharted territory here. This is exciting stuff. And Mahmood, I know Saqib, I think will. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't come again. They think really highly of him. White ball, perhaps in particular. Also with that reverse swing that he gets with the red, he's always going to be an asset. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if he plays some Test cricket this summer. He's just got to get back on the field.
And on Parkinson, his attitude is one of his best traits. So he'll be pretty philosophical about what's happened here. There's a brotherhood among spinners anyway, and especially deep one among the odd leggy that manages to break through in English cricket. And he'll be delighted for Rayan Ahmed. There won't be any bitterness there. There'll be maybe a sense of the cards could have fallen slightly more favourably for him, and he'll play another 4 or 5 years before he begins to really feel like he might have actually mastered this art. Right? He can come again at any point, and if it's just a question of a little bit more zip through the air, a little bit more pace through the air to really trouble international players, then that's something that you imagine that he could work on over the next period of time and come again. He's got some amazing natural attributes. As you say, he does offer something different, a point of difference with Rayan Ahmed. So I think he'll be okay. I think he'll be fine at this stage. And there are plenty of T20 gigs out there as well for him to hoover up in the meantime. And as Joe says, with Saqib, they love him. They think he's great. He's a very intelligent cricketer, and he's a versatile, brilliant fielder, very modern cricketer. So, yeah, again, there's so many percolating around in English cricket, and it's an intriguing time. I was having a chat last night, by the way, to 2 lads in the pub who know cricket well, and they were under the assumption that Duckett probably won't be opening at the start of the summer. There's no question, right, that he's ensconced now, right, in that setup. He's obviously on the tour. No Jennings in the Test squad.
I think he'd have to have a bit of a shocker in New Zealand to miss out entirely. I mean, you could see it's unfolding, and that there is the narrative that he's good in subcontinental conditions against spinners, but he's a bit vulnerable against the moving ball, which is. Most openers are vulnerable against the moving ball because that's the thing they have to deal with all the time. But you could see Duckett having a series of low scores in New Zealand. Suddenly the narrative shifts and come the first test, things have moved on. But the first Ashes test comes along pretty quickly. There's not a huge amount of cricket before it. So I think I would be surprised if Duckett's not there. It would have to be a really poor tour of New Zealand to shift that.
There's numbers in the championship for knots.
Are great.
Have been decent, yeah, more than decent.
Yeah.
So I think he's exactly what they were looking for. Exactly what they were looking for. Somebody that will shift the game along. Somebody who can do what Alex Lees could not, which was, was naturally be an aggressive player. So I don't see any scenario where he. I mean, you look at his mate at the other end. If Ben Duckett is going to miss out after a couple of failures, which we're projecting that there will be, of course there will. Then I'm not sure any of them will be able to look each other in the eye if they were to leave him out, given the support they've given to his mate at the other end.
Yeah, exactly. I think the key point is that his record in England over the last 2 years is excellent. So he's not a one-trick pony. I mean, I know he has a unique way of playing the turning ball in that he sweeps literally everything, but he's a far more rounded player than that. And it'd be a mistake, I think, to pigeonhole him as what simply, a sort of spin-centric sort of batter. He's obviously a lot more than that. But yeah, I was just curious, really, that this was suggested.
I think that narrative came from Pakistani pundits who obviously don't follow English domestic cricket. I can totally see if you only watch the England international side and you see this guy do really, really well in a T20 series and then they select him in the same conditions. You might think that selection's based on how well he's done in T20 cricket, but it wasn't really. It was just a coincidence that he also did well in the T20 series. He got picked. We were saying it on this podcast throughout the summer. If Lee doesn't go well in the South Africa series, there's a strong chance that Duckett comes in. So yeah, I think I agree with all of you. If something's got to go pretty drastically wrong for Duckett to not start the Ashes, I think.
You'd say the next in line would probably be Keaton Jennings based on the county summary he had and the fact he was on that tour of Pakistan. Well, Keaton Jennings has not got a good record in home test matches. He's looked suspect against high quality fast bowling. I know he said he's worked on his technique to improve that, but it's not as though you've got a kind of ready-made replacement lined up who you'd say, yeah, he's going to come in and score runs against that Australian attack. So again, I think that all works in Duckett's favour.
Yeah, and reasonably telling that he's not been selected in this squad. So if one of Duckett or Cawley goes down with an injury in New Zealand, there's going to be a makeshift opener. So maybe that gives a glimpse to
well, it'll probably be Brooke, won't it? Because the ghost in the machine is Johnny Bairstow, isn't it? And kind of where they all fit in once he's fit again. the injury sounded horrendous, by the way. So I mean, it's unlikely that he's going to be. He might be ready for the beginning of the summer, but that's not a given. So who knows? It might be without him altogether. But I suppose if you put together all of the best toys in your Christmas sack, then Bairstow would be in it, as would Brook, and therefore there's a spot missing, isn't there? Or there's somebody that's going to have to miss out in order to make up the 11. So there's another intriguing little subplot as we move forward.
By about midnight last night, after a few of what you can expect over Christmas time, I did have Brook as my opening batsman, by the way, to solve the Johnny Bairstow problem.
How many have you had?
Oh yeah, all of them. Just picked them all and then lined them up and then knocked them back. I look, he's such a great player. Obviously, such an intriguingly good player. And I know he's never done it before, but he's technically pretty sound, and he's got the chutzpah, isn't he? He's got the dash and daring and brashness to pull just about anything off at the moment. And it would just be a sort of Stokesian decision, I think, to say, look, kidder, up you go. Let's see how you go. Let's see if you can be a sort of Yorkshire saywag for us for a couple of years.
Looking at that,
that's a conversation for another day.
But looking at that squad for New Zealand, if an opener was to go down and there isn't a clear opener in that squad, I wouldn't be surprised if they just stick Will Jacks up there and say go and play like you do in white ball cricket, because they haven't got Bairstow. The dilemma hasn't arrived yet. Bairstow's not fit. I could definitely see Will Jacks being a kind of a makeshift pinch hitter in New Zealand.
Have you spoken to him, Mark? Johnny Bairstow, about his recovery?
No.
You haven't, no?
No, I haven't. I spoke, but obviously I was with Broady through the long nights, mornings of the Test matches, and no, he had spoken to him. Johnny sort of like piped up every once in a while on text messages, sort of asking where am I going to get back in the team, sort of tongue in cheek, but not tongue in cheek.
Yeah, sure.
And that's where I heard potentially that the injury was pretty damn serious, and that recovery is not going to be straightforward for him.
Yeah, that's what I've heard as well. When you're on Sky, I was meaning to ask you this: do you sort of grab a little 20-minute DOS, through the mornings and all of that, or are you a pro to your bootlaces? What's it like when it comes off you in the middle of the night?
Mean, this series was unbelievably entertaining. I've never known sort of like a compelling a watch as that. So it wasn't a case that we were having to kind of keep ourselves awake to watch it. It was kind of, the sessions flew by generally, which has not always been the case over the years. And so no, we would sit there and watch and talk crap. They've got this amazing set of stairs that runs up about 6 stories up the side. So every once in a while, when when you're falling asleep, go for a little thunder up and down the stairs for a bit, they come refreshed and ready to go for the tea break. But no, I mean, I can't ever remember watching a sort of like particularly Test matches from that part of the world, whereby you just felt that you couldn't miss any of it. That's extraordinary, because we're watching, Pakistan are now playing against New Zealand. I've had that on the TV this morning, and it's imminently missable, isn't it? All of it, and the crowds aren't. Exactly what Test match cricket in that part of the world has always been like. It's just gone back to how, here you go, you bat first, you get 400, nearly 500. Team batting seconds does the same. It all happens at around about 3 and over, and you hope that something mad happens on the last day and a half. That's how it's always been. Yeah. But for 3.5 astonishing weeks, it was anything but that.
Phil's mentioned it already, but England named an ODI squad for their trip to South Africa earlier in the week. Jofra Archer is back. That's the big news. He's in line for his first England appearance since March 2021. Joe Root has been rested. He'll be playing for the Dubai Capitals in that UAE T20 competition instead. Assuming that Ben Stokes unretires before the World Cup, it looks like there's a 3-way shootout for the Owen Morgan replacement spot in the 11 between Duckett, Milan and Brook. There's no Alex Hales in that squad either. Butch, the thinking from England en route is that he's a good enough player to not need to play these 3 ODIs 8 months out of a World Cup. And they'll do what they did for the T20 World Cup and ramp up their preparation in September. But Root and England don't play that much ODI cricket. Their players play absolutely loads of T20 stuff throughout the year, even if it's not for England. Root's not scored 100 in ODI cricket since the World Cup. He's not played a single ODI outside of England since the start of the pandemic. India, for example, play way more ODI cricket than England. What do you make of that use of Root? I mean, the UAE T20 League is hardly an elite T20 league yet either.
No, I think part of it is a little bit of a it's a little bit of a golden handshake's not the right word, because obviously he's not done, but it's a little bit. Joe, you've missed out on. We've been off filling our boots and lining our coffers for the last 5 or 6 years. You've not been able to do any of this. You've not experienced any of this. Playing in those environments with different players from all around the world. Go and do it. Go and enjoy it. Go and see what you can pick up from it, and we'll have you back when you're ready. I think that's all that is. And I think it's another piece of expert man management, to be honest with you. Imagine, rewind the clock back to the days of KP and him proving to be right about sort of playing in the IPL and all these other types of things. Imagine if the Enlightenment had been around to have sort of said to him, okay, let's let him go and do this, go and experience it, go and earn the money, then come back to us, as a better player and a better bloke, or at least in a better mood, all those years ago. So what the thing that you get the feeling from watching the decision making and watching the man management of Stokes and McCullum and Key in the background is that they're always a few steps ahead in terms of their thinking, in terms of how they're treating players and how they want them then to come back and fit in for them, whilst still trying to pick the team to win games right now. And there's a real skill in that. If you have huge assets, and we always talk about assets in terms of sort of fast bowlers or whatever it might be, you're always trying to look after them for this assignment and that assignment. Well, the same goes for players in terms of their sort of internal well-being, or their sort of their ego, or their just their self-worth, or the way that their organisation is making them feel. Am I really that important to you? I feel like I should be the most important player around. And whether, as selfless as all of these guys are, that internal dialogue does exist for people. And for somebody like Joe Root to say to him, mate, you're a great player. Don't worry about it. These games are not important to us or to you, or not enough for you not to go off and go and have a bit of fun, go and enjoy yourself in a way that everybody else has been able to all these years. You've put in your time. So you go, and we'll welcome you back with open arms when it's done. And I think it's beautiful, and it will work out fantastically well. It'll give Joe a new lease of life as well. And it also means that the sort of the conveyor belt of talent and opportunity keeps providing itself to all these young guns who are not kind of getting itchy feet and thinking to themselves, well, why am I bothering playing international cricket for England when I can make a shed load of cash not playing for England? So there are all these little things at play here in order to keep the talent product line coming and wanting to play for England, and I think they're doing it great.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that from Butch. Absolutely. I think this is another really smart call. I think on top of that, I mean, I wouldn't be fussed if Joe Root doesn't play another ODI until the start of the World Cup, really. I just think of all England's players, it matters the least of him. I mean, he's never played vastly differently from one format to the other. He's such a natural. I just don't think it really matters in his case. And absolutely, let's have a look at some of the people coming through. And if Harry Brook can go into that World Cup with a stack of ODI runs behind him, that makes England such a stronger side.
It was a good week for Harry Brook. The IPL auction happened. Lots of English players got gigs. Stokes, Curran and Brook all got deals worth well over £1 million. I think Brook's deal was the highest ever for a specialist batter, and I think Curran's the highest ever. Joe Root got his first IPL gig, as did Will Jacks, Reece Topley and Phil Salt. Adil Rashid was picked up as well. Jacks, I think, has got a reasonable chance of playing quite a lot at RCB because Glenn Maxwell is potentially out injured for a while, who obviously performed a similar role. Ireland's Josh Little got a big money deal worth over $500,000 for the 2022 champions. Good job.
No, like Brian was happy about that. I know.
Was he?
No, but good on him as well. I mean, he deserves it. He really does. He's proper high impact new ball player, much quicker than he looks. and I think he'll go really well in it.
In the international game this week, there was an amazing test match between India and Bangladesh. India beat Bangladesh by 3 wickets in the second and final test of that series. India were chasing 145. They were 37 for 4 and then 74 for 7 before Shreyas Iyer and Ravi Chandran Ashwin got them home. John asks, given the success of England's new brand of cricket, are you surprised at what seems like a lack of interest from other nations to try and copy at least some elements of that? I think it's a very good question, especially in relation to this game. So India, when they were 37 for 4, they were 37 for 4 off 20 overs. It reminded me quite a lot of that England game against Pakistan in the UAE 10 years ago, where England 70 all out chasing 140, and you're just wondering where the hell's the next run coming from. And then when India did get over the line, it was Ashwin and Iyer scoring a quicker rate. What do you guys think? Are you slightly surprised that we've not seen other teams at least trying up the scoring rate a little bit? I think, but you mentioned that Pakistan-New Zealand test match. It is comparatively much drier than the England series, but I think New Zealand have actually tried to score a quicker rate than they otherwise would have done. So maybe there's a glimpse of that changing there.
Yeah, I just think it'll take a little bit of time to filter through. I'm pretty sure that if you're Pakistan in particular, and you've just watched what's happened to you on your home soil, and the stats are that 47% of all test matches played in your country are draws, you'd be completely mad not to think that was the way to go, right? Or at least you'd kind of really hate the game. You'd really hate cricket if you thought that we're just going to go back to doing it like that forevermore and hope that people turn up and want. So I think it'll take a little time. I think that particularly when Australia come over, because nobody wants to turn around and say that they're copying somebody else. I mean, that's kind of, rather than being the best form of the highest form of flattery, it's like a sign of weakness. However, Australia has been so used to being the team and the country that sort of sets the standards for player behaviour. The way that the game should be played, scoring at 4 and over, whatever it was back in the day. All of these things are kind of like, it's Australia that leads the way. So we'd be completely mad to think that the testosterone wouldn't kick in during the course of the Ashes series, and that they'd start going toe to toe at each other. I can't see any other way of it playing out. Unless England kind of have an absolute, disaster first test match and get obliterated in a kind of old-fashioned way, which again I can't see happening. You just think to yourself that you're going to end up with a slugfest. It's going to be like Hagler Hearns from whatever it was, 84, just two teams just swinging haymakers at each other until one falls over, and it's going to be good.
In terms of its wider impact in matches not involving England, I think it will be intriguing to see if India do show any interest in adapting their style, because India typically aren't in the business of looking at what other countries do and say, yeah, we'll pick that up. They are the trendsetters. They lead the way, and Rishabh Pant will always back like Rishabh Pant, but India generally play quite conservative test cricket, and it's worked for them pretty well. I don't really see them budging. I think there might even be this is the way we play and we're gonna stick to it. A lot of their players don't necessarily. I mean, Pujara's back in that side now. I don't think Pujara is going to come out and start scoring at a strike rate of 120. I mean, he's going to do what he's done for the rest of his test career. So I think India v England will be a fascinating matchup in India. Whether England can do what they did in Pakistan and how India will respond to it. But I don't see them budging, really. I think they'll stick to what they've done for the last few years, which has brought them a lot of success.
And Australia and India as well. Australia go to India at the start of 2023, and India have quietly not had a very good year. They've only played 7 test matches, won 4 of them. But in that 4, those 4 wins were at home to Sri Lanka and then away to Bangladesh, and they only just won one of those Bangladesh test matches in conditions that are pretty favourable to them.
That series could well be a belter. Just on the Australian point, just to carry on from what Mark was saying, I've said it before on this show that they will be ticking the sort of overwhelming smugness of the English at this point, as if we've recreated cricket, we've redrawn all the boundaries, and they will be saying, well, hold on a second, and they will probably point to even just last summer, right, where you have Warner being Warner, running at a strike rate of 70, whatever it is at test level, and then you have even Travis Head, who's scoring at a run of ball, and you saw it again 2 weeks ago, goes out and smashes a 85 ball 90 in a nip and tuck test match. And you have Cameron Green in the middle order, who's a big hitting, attacking, kind of swashbuckling kind of cricketer. And so they will say, well, we've always had that spirit. It might not be quite as extreme and demonstrative as the Stokes era, but they've always had that belief in attack being the best form of defence and attack being the best form of finding your way to 20 wickets. And that's always been the mark of their cricket. So if anything, what England are really doing is now taking the Australian model and then daring to even run it a little bit further down the line. But the themes carry echoes throughout, I would say, Australian cricket, all the way back to the 70s, really. And so, yeah, they will be ticking, I think, at the English just now. And all of this can be thrown into the cauldron of next summer, all the more so, because there's going to be an edge on top of the needle that is always there, I think, on this one, because the English will properly fancy it now. Rather than hoping for the best, they'll be expecting to do this. And they'll come up against a team that are a little bit stung because they've been questioned. Their preeminence has been questioned by the Poms. So it's all going to kick off. It's going to be spectacular, I think.
On other series that could be really good at the start of next year, I think that England tour of New Zealand could be closer than we might think at the moment. England haven't won a test match in New Zealand for absolutely ages. And that New Zealand batting lineup is still pretty good. Yesterday Conway became the quickest New Zealander to 1,000 test runs. I think Mitchell will almost certainly equal that record in the second innings of this test match. It's a good top 6, top 7. England have really struggled to take 20 wickets in New Zealand for quite a long time now. And at the end of the day, they're still going to need to do that. And it's been very impressive how they've managed that throughout the last year. But I think this is the biggest test in a way. Obviously, conditions in Pakistan were more extreme, but it's not easy to take 20 wickets in New Zealand, especially they do change the pitches quite dramatically. Sometimes it's very green, but sometimes it can be extremely flat. So I think that could be a big test.
Sorry, yeah, talk of this New Zealand series distills the frustrations and the nonsense of 2 test series, especially when one of the big boys are involved. I'm unmoved by the New Zealand series. We were talking about it a couple of weeks ago on this show. I'm broadly unmoved by it. We talk about the jeopardy on Crawley. He's only got 4 knocks. Might even only be 3 with a bit of rain around, or if they make 600 or whatever. So all these narratives that we're trying to flow into this series, they come up against this problem, don't they? Right? That we can't really begin to get our teeth into the overarching spectacle of this series because there's so little of it. And it's so frustrating. These are 2 storied teams. They should be playing 3 test matches. Come what may, they should be finding a way to play 3 test matches.
It's a long way to go for 2.
It is, isn't it? It is. To be run out and, a bit of rain and pack your bags and come home again. Anyway, moving on.
Just on that Pakistan-New Zealand test match, there's a return to test cricket for Sarfraz Ahmed in his first test match in nearly 4 years. He's done really well in Pakistani domestic cricket, but he's in the side in place of Mohammad Rizwan, who's basically just had 5 not great test matches. So, on the one hand, a deserving recall for Sarfraz, but pretty harsh for Rizwan, who not that long ago would have been one of the first names on the team sheet. In Australia, David Warner scored a double 100 on his 100th test. It's his first test century in quite a long time. There was a very funny moment when he got to his 200. I'm not sure if you guys saw this. So he was battling injury and cramp. And when he got to 200, he did his trademark punch in the air jump and then had to limp off injured after doing it. And then he came back to bat the next day. And then he got done by, I think, Norkia without adding to his score. Australia have got 3 guys who are really quite injured. So Warner, Stark and Green. So Green batted for hours and hours and hours to help Kerry get to his 100 because Green, I think, has broken his hand. Yet continued to bat. So pretty impressive stuff from the Australians. South Africa were bowled out for 189, which extends their run without reaching 200 to 7 innings.
Just want to add on this, Australia's summer from a spectator point of view, as an Aussie fan, tough watch. And this is not to put the boot in at all on the Aussie side because they've wiped the floor with the West Indies and with South Africa, but they've been some painful cricket matches, horribly mismatched one-sided affairs. And obviously their summer kicked off with a botched World Cup campaign as well. That combined with the Big Bash not really getting going, some peculiar results and peculiar games within that as well. Some very low scores, some stodgy pitches. From a spectator point of view, it's good. It would have been a really tough summer, I think, this to watch. And all right, you can clear off 2 test matches against a pretty woe-begotten West Indies side, but then you think, all right, South Africa will turn up and they'll scrap hard, and it's a good rivalry that historically. Well, that's been a painful watch as well, in truth. It'd be interesting to see actually come the end of the summer what their numbers are like. You know, there's a lot of money that's been flooded in from the TV companies, Fox up there, and yeah, it'd be interesting to see, I think, just how much the Aussie public were able to stomach it, because there wasn't much evidence of it during the World Cup. Admittedly, it was early in their season, but it's been a rather sorry affair since as well.
And it's maybe a glimpse of what could happen here in 2024. So in the 2024 English summer, there's currently a T20 World Cup scheduled for in the Caribbean and the States. And then England's test summer is 3 home tests against West Indies and 3 home tests against Sri Lanka. And I know that both are improving sides, but England at home against those 2 teams, even when England have been really not that good, have been pretty one-sided. So potentially a glimpse of what's to come here. A couple of listener questions before we get to our moments of the year. James asks, where do you see Test cricket in 10 years' time? Will it just be England versus Australia versus India, with those 3 nations playing each other regularly against, and then only 2 Test series once every 4 years against the other nations? Or will the way that England are playing reignite interest around the world?
But I think, I mean, without trying to nail it down to this is what it's going to look like, I think the very premise that there will be less teams and less series competing in Test match cricket, I think is almost a given, regardless of what England do.
Well, Greg Bartley, the ICC chief executive, said as much himself. So if that's the message coming right from the top, it's hard to see it being anything but, really.
Yeah, it's a huge shame. But it's been coming for ages, and nothing really has been done to try and stop it over the last 15 years. And we're getting to that point now where it's just critical. You've got boards who can't afford to pay their players, at least not pay them to the same degree as they can get paid for doing far less work playing in franchise cricket, and the sort of like the eroding of the importance of Test match series. You know, you have these 2 Test match series. You've got series that aren't part of the World Test Championship. The World Test Championship doesn't make any sense to anybody still. All of these attempts to try and bring some sort of context to Test match cricket arguably has done the opposite for me. I've always believed, and I've probably said it on here before, that each Test match has its own context anyway, always has, and that you didn't need some great overarching behemoth to kind of make an individual Test match of some importance. And the problem has been is that the players now have more choices. The boards now kind of see it as a loss leader for them anyway, most places. And therefore Test match cricket has been allowed to kind of wither away in importance. And you cannot tell me that the people making noises about, and this is people at the very top of the game making noises about how important Test match cricket is, actually believe it, because their actions and their words haven't matched up over all this time. And now we're in a situation whereby it's almost financially impossible for the majority of Test playing nations to continue playing Test match cricket.
I agree. I agree with all of that, Mark. The only bit I'd quibble with is the fact that this Test Championship is now in play, and while it is confusing and bewildering and obviously unbalanced, and clearly no absolute panacea to the problems that you quite rightly outline, I would rather they were trying something than trying nothing, personally, and I would rather this rather garbled version of a good idea is in place than no idea at all, personally. And just as a punter, not as a hack, but as a punter, the Bangladesh-India test that Yas mentioned earlier, that had a very real impact on who's going to be playing in this final in June next year. And if India had gone down, then it made it very, very considerably more hard for them to qualify than if they'd actually got over the line. And so a game that would have otherwise been a little bit of a here today, gone tomorrow, cash cow for Bangladesh and India doing the business and traveling around and playing where they need to play to generate cash. would have been instantly forgotten. As it was, there was a bit more on that game from a fan's point of view, from an outsider's point of view, or a neutral's, than if there hadn't been this kind of mild, questionable jeopardy attached to it, but still a form of context nonetheless.
But Phil, did you get the sense that we know that? I mean, you particularly know that because you covered it on the podcast a week ago or 2 weeks ago. Did you get the sense that enough other people knew that for that to actually have?
No, nowhere near. Nowhere near. So whose fault is that, and what more can be done? Well, it's next to impossible to reorder the game in such a way that it is coherent, because it is so unbalanced. But the nearer that one gets to the point at which the qualifying period is over, the more clarity we get with who's in the mix and who's not. And if you really do care about Test cricket, then you would want to know, and you would find a way to find out. They certainly knew. The Indian players certainly knew, because there was quotes about the game afterwards. They knew what was riding on that game because they've worked out the permutations. Surely it's messy. Of course it's messy. But I would rather it was being tried and then maybe finessed in the years and months to come than not tried at all.
In terms of whose fault is that? I mean, the ICC could do more, I think.
Yeah.
They could put out more press releases, but really the ICC messages don't reach people outside the media. It's basically just kind of press releases.
Well,
I think the media have to take a lot of responsibility for that. I mean, we take the piss out of Ben for his spreadsheets and knowing what every match means, but actually, more people should be doing that, and that should be talked about by the pundits. That should be talked about by broadcasters in terms of what this match means, because a lot of people don't.
But unfortunately, that's the problem, though, isn't it? If it takes a spreadsheet to work it out, then it's not exactly for every man, is it? You know what I mean? It's not. Therein lies the problem.
The spreadsheet can give you. We're not saying put the spreadsheet out, but if you study that spreadsheet, you can get a line. You can find a narrative like the India-Bangladesh test, and then tell your audience this is what that means, and that's down to us, I think.
Yeah, and I would argue that 6 months out from the end of the period, when everyone's playing everybody else because it's the British winter time, is equivalent to the last stretch of a Premier League campaign, if you like, right? Where suddenly you do know the permutations, and it's not just been this whole tranche of games, but now you do know what teams need to stay up or to get fourth or whatever it might be. Now we do know the permutations for India, and we do know the permutations for Australia a little bit more clearly than we did a couple of months ago. And so
I get all of that.
Yes,
I get all of that. But using the Premier League as a rather unfortunate comparator is not helped, because months out from the end of the Premier League, people care what happens on that particular Saturday, and the issue that you've got is that people don't care what happens in that particular Test match. You know, in the preceding time up to the run-in, there's no reason for people to get excited about the actual fixtures that are happening at the time, which is
the point that you make,
which is why the game is in big trouble, because the games themselves, regardless of context outside, do not matter enough. They don't matter enough for people to turn up and watch them, let alone get the spreadsheet out and work out what's going to be happening 18 months down the line. And therein lies the issue.
But do we just then shrug our shoulders to this lack of context and lack of jeopardy and say, okay, fine, well, that's that then? Not enough people are turning up.
All I'm saying to you is that the context is not the thing that is going to save it. What will save it is making the idea of Test match cricket, the remuneration so that the best players want to play in it, the most important thing. Not the bauble at the end, but the actual, the thing that's killing it at the moment is that players are just not enough players from countries that are not being paid extremely well to do it are willing to play it anymore. Do you know what I mean? You kind of if you're beginning your career at this point in time, are you going to look to Sam Curran making 2.2 million for 5 or 6 weeks work in the IPL, or are you going to be a New Zealand? Or are you going to want to play 6 or 7 Test matches for New Zealand, earning as much money as one of the lowest paid members of Indian players in the IPL are over the course of a year, being away from home? And there is the decision that is being left with the people who are going to be playing the game, the people who we pay to watch to play the game. And so there's nothing the context at the end of it is going to be able to do to solve that particular problem.
But I do think it helps to a small degree solve or address the problem of apathy among the spectators, among the fans. I do think it goes some way to adding a little bit more meat on the bone of an otherwise random test match that, as we say, does struggle for oomph and impact. So I would rather that there is that attempt to try and put a little bit meat on that bone than to shrug our shoulders to it. It doesn't solve the problem of what you talk about regarding the remuneration of the game. Absolutely not. But there are two different things at play there for me.
And I think on the fans, I think there are two things that have been done. Number one, Ben should just share his spreadsheet so everyone knows exactly who needs what. And then
running the ICC, been saying it for years.
And then number two, and this is a serious point, make them easy to watch. India Bangladesh, there's a test match between two of the three most populated cricket playing nations. How do you watch it? Australia women just played India women in a brilliant series. How do you watch it? I think like you can't expect fans to feel invested in cricket they can't watch. People in England, there'll be decent numbers watching Pakistan, New Zealand at the moment just because it's on. Put the Test cricket on. The Asia Cup earlier this year, you could basically not watch it in the UK. It was on channel 700 and something, and you needed a Sky subscription to have it. Too much cricket is spread across so many different channels, half of them you never heard of, and I don't think you can expect fans to feel invested in competitions they can't watch. The Premier League, if we're using that as an example, that's rammed down your throat throughout the year. Yeah, there are two main broadcasters who show it, but you know exactly where it's going to be. With cricket, other than England matches, and even with England matches, you've had 3 broadcasters in the last 18 months. It's not easy to watch, and I think until that's fixed, I can't really see people getting invested in whatever the ICC do in terms of the format, when games are played, etc.
Just one final bit, and I've said it before, but I feel it more and more to really inject some kind of slightly phony meaning to this thing. Got to be a 3-test series between the finalists. It has to be a 3-test series. A one-off game, sure. But we talk about narrative all the time with this stuff, and it's absolutely essential. So for me, that would be the big thing that I would shift. In fact, I would like a whole summer, in my dreams, I'd like a whole summer blocked off between the top 4 sides. They play a round robin, and then there's a best of 3 towards the end. We could do that in an English summer. It may intervene with some of England's test matches, but as you say, that's becoming more and more moot as we move through the years anyway. But anyway, look.
With a month for the 100 in the middle as
Christmas.
well. A slightly more fun question. Chris asks, pound for pound, was that the best year for English cricket across formats ever? I think if you just focus on the men's game, it's got to be up there, right?
I think it's got to be. And I think also, I've been chatting with Andrew Miller about this as a potential column for the next magazine, that not only is it great for English cricket fans, but I also feel like English cricket in terms of its global standing has never been at a higher point. We saw it with the white ball side under Rowan Morgan, suddenly were the world leaders. And now, look, we're not saying Ben Stokes is Test side of the world leaders yet, because they can't qualify for the World Test Championship and they're, 4th in the rankings? But they are at least showing the world how they want their fans want them to play. Suddenly, English cricket feels in a very kind of privileged position that I've never known it in my lifetime. Everyone wants to play like England. Everyone wants to watch England. That's not how I remember cricket growing up, or even. I suppose maybe 2005 Ashes, but even that was a moment rather than a kind of a wider thing, I think. So yeah, personally, I think it is. I think this could be the greatest year for English cricket.
Well, I mean, if the market decides, then having all of those England players being picked up for IPL franchises tells its own story, doesn't it? You know, the stock of our cricket and cricketers is high, because people are paying high prices to have them come and compete for their team. So that tells you all you need to know. You know, you win a global tournament and win all those. I mean, 3 test matches on the bounce in Pakistan is just staggering. You know, and you can Pakistan, their team being particularly their bowling being as poor as it was, notwithstanding. Even that, you can kind of override that because it's still unbelievable achievement to do that. And the turnaround, I suppose all of these things, to use your word, Phil, about narratives, all of these things are kind of, they're given a time and place, aren't they? And perhaps if England had been off the back of less dire times, it wouldn't seem quite such an extraordinary feat over the last, whatever it was, since June. But the fact of the matter was, the story is the story. The story was 1 from 17 to go to 9 from 10 and a World Cup. I mean, that's pretty damn good, right?
I don't want to drop Gilo in the clarts here, and it's nothing against him at all, but it is quite something to put it into context when he said in January this year, he said, we can make whatever changes we want. You can change me, change the head coach, change the captain, but we're only setting up future leaders for failure. And he said that this year. And so when you take that mood around English cricket from the then supremo of it to now, that is mind-blowing, really.
Well, we had a podcast exactly a year to this day. It's a year to the day since Boland took 6 for 7 against England.
Me and Mark did it.
It was me, Butch, and Phil, and we basically spent an hour talking about the systemic problems of why England don't produce players. And here we are a year later, saying that England has had the best year ever.
The high performance review is looking a bit like might have been a massive waste of time, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. I hope it didn't cost very much.
And also, the one thing that's on, actually, maybe I don't think people perhaps take for granted, is that England produce so many multifaceted cricketers. I think a big reason as to why England is so flexible in white ball cricket and red ball cricket is because so many players have a second skill, which compared to other countries really, really does stand out. Great question in from David here. He says, I've opened the batting at Taunton in a test match. I've been timed out hundreds of times because I've forgotten my kit, and I once had ice cream with Bill Athy and Judi Dench. Did the panel have any recurring or interesting cricket dreams?
Right. I'm just going to kick this one off. This isn't a recurrer. This is a fresh one from about 2.5 hours ago. And it's a stunner. Right, Yas, listen in. Slightsy, who is the boss of Wisden, in effect, CEO of the company, and a long-standing friend of Mark's as well as mine and Joe's, he employed a new commercial man, right? Really sort of ruddy-faced looking bloke, tough fella, a mystery, don't know who he is. Anyway, he started coming into the office and sitting opposite me in the office and gaslighting me. Oh, I listened to that podcast. You weren't very good on it. That article you wrote the other day, no, not for me. Just gaslighting me day after day after day. Eventually, one morning, I threw a bowl of porridge in his face, and he used that as the moment to make an official complaint against me. Went to Sykesy, but get this, Sykesy's no longer the CEO of Wisden. He's the chairman of the 1922 committee, that sort of talk committee, the Graham Brady or whatever he's called, the one that got rid of Liz Truss. And Sykesy's in charge of the 1922. So I've been hauled up to Parliament, frog marched out of the Oval, hauled up into Parliament in front of Sykesy's 22 committee. This happened 2 hours ago. There's a thing for you.
That's fantastic. It's not really that cricket related though. That's more of a workplace.
It was all set at the Oval. He was going after the podcast, Jazz.
Hands off.
Yeah, blatantly.
I've had two. One standalone. So one dream was asking Alistair Cook. I mean, this is so boring, but asking Alistair Cook if he's worked with Shan Masood recently, because Shan Masood I thought looked exactly like Alistair Cook when he played that last test match in Pakistan.
That was an actual dream, my God.
Yeah. Then the other one that is a genuinely recurring one is less so now, but I used to have nightmares that I was no longer able to throw the ball, like a fever dream where the ball would just slip out of my hand every time I tried to throw it into the boundary. But then at the start of last season, I actually did my shoulder, so I couldn't throw the ball all year. So it basically happened. Butch, do you dream about any of the products you had to promote while on commentary in Pakistan? Does that...
Yeah, mate, seriously, I can't move for toothpaste in my house. All the same ones. I reckon all of us, all the cricket players, would have had exactly the same. I mean, they're not being able to tie your shoelaces up, or not being able to get through the gate and being timed out. All the very, very dull, but regulation that every single person that's ever played cricket will have had. I guess. I'm pretty sure I had some cricket I was playing. I think I might have been playing in a test match a couple of nights ago. I can't remember any of the details, but I did actually have a game. So somewhere deep in my consciousness, there is still a sort of like a need or a want to go out there and perform again. But we'll keep it.
I had a recurring visit from David Boone through the 90s when I used to cricket dream, and he would always come over to me and try and sell me his Adidas boots. Do you remember those iconic Adidas boots from the 93 series? He used to bat in them, and he'd just emerge like in a Kurt Vonnegut novel. He'd just emerge and try and sell me his boots, and could be dreaming about anything, but there's Booney, and he comes with his boots. Make of that what you will.
Wow. Before we get on to the moments,
Joe conspicuously silent on this, by the way.
I tend to leave cricket at the bedroom door, to be honest. It doesn't really permeate my dreams, but
that's it.
Oh, you are us in our greatest moments, Joe.
Excellent. Before we move on to our moments of the year, a message from the Wisden shop. For everyone who celebrated Christmas and has had time off over the holidays, we're probably safe in assuming that you're not quite sure what day of the week it is. But not to worry, the excellent Wisden 2023 calendar is now back in stock and makes it the perfect gift to kick off the new year. Each month features one of the 12 limited edition Andrew Redden collection paintings exclusively available on the Wisden shop. The collection captures some of the most beautiful cricket grounds in the UK, such as Lords, the Oval, Trent Bridge, Old Trafford, Canterbury, the Grange and Taunton, making every new month a pleasure to unfold. Stocks are limited, so get yours now while they are still here. So our moments of the year, keep them reasonably brief because we've got quite a few to get through from the listeners as well. Joe, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, we've got two, a sad one and a happy one. Sad one, March the 4th, when news came through of Shane Warne's death. I didn't know him at all personally. At times I found his commentary quite irritating, but I found it an oddly unsettling experience for someone I didn't know to die. And he just kind of felt there was a largeness of life to him that he felt kind of omnipresent, almost kind of immortal. So when news comes through that someone like that has died, it was a really, unsettling, I think is the right words, experience. I remember we gathered for a podcast that evening, I think a few hours later. I remember Butch speaking really beautifully about playing against him and the challenges that threw up. And then we did a special magazine, including Butch's words and the words of a few others. And that whole experience was quite a kind of cathartic to go through it. So that's my sadder moment. And then happy moment, we've covered a lot of it, so I'll keep it very brief. June 14th, day 5 of the Trent Bridge test against New Zealand, where it looks like England were clinging on for a draw, or based on previous 24 months, going to lose in a humiliating fashion and just have that tumble of wickets on the afternoon. And then they pulled off the unthinkable, which is no longer unthinkable. Now it's become commonplace. And that was really the start of it all. And, what we've seen, Butch touched on it just now, what we've seen over the last few months is not just one of cricket's great turnarounds, it's one of sport's great turnarounds. It's truly astonishing. And that was the day that was the catalyst for what followed.
Phil?
So I think Mark's going to touch on Rawalpindi, but that 500 in a day stays with me. Not even in a day, in sort of 70-something overs madness. But also do you remember England won the World Cup this year? Do you remember that? Remember that? That happened as well. God, we're smug, aren't we? And that semi-final against India was an extraordinary game of cricket and an extraordinary demonstration of Jos Buttler's genius in particular, I thought. And I've always adored him and I've always rooted for him. And I felt immensely sorry for him last winter when he was trying to get through Australia, as a test cricketer, haunted look on his face. He wasn't himself, tough time for him. And so for him to go back to Australia and to orchestrate that World Cup win and the humbling, if you like, of India, dare I say, in that 10-wicket win, 16 overs or whatever it was, to chase down 160, 170, with Hales at the other end as well. And I think Butler and Rob Key deserves a lot of credit, and Matthew Mott too, for reintroducing him back into the setup. He'd served his time and then some. And so that was a very special day, I think, for English cricket, and one that you couldn't have really imagined a few years back. But again, to echo Joe, it's suddenly become commonplace. It was Butler's World Cup, that, and I couldn't have been happier for him.
Mm.
It feels like this podcast reviewing 2022 really has set England up for a truly awful 2023.
Oh, they'll be crap.
Dollop of Aussie Schadenfreude arriving come July.
3 broken fingers and an innings defeat. Yeah, mark it up.
Butch, what about you?
Well, yeah, there's the Islamabad Test match, just the whole thing. I mean, we kind of set it up, hadn't we, in terms of the Paddy Mayne's rogue heroes in the build up, and they couldn't. I mean, it was just kind of the most mad thing you've ever seen, wasn't it? I mean, 6 and a bit and over in the first innings, nearly 7s in the second, right the way up to sort of 8 minutes before the darkness descended. Not taking the new ball, then taking the new ball. Pretty much every decision that Ben made throughout the course of that Test match was spot on, prescient, completely and utterly. Brilliant and vindicated. It was just a staggering performance. It really was. One of the. I think I'd go out on a limb and say that is the best Test match win I've ever seen. It was just everything about it was what you could fall in love with about the game of cricket, and just to be able to conceive something like that. And when Ben spoke at the end of the Test match, he had, obviously he knew that they were going to have to score quickly in order to give themselves time. But then he there was a huge period of it from sort of day 3 onwards where he was making it up as he went along, trying to stay ahead of the game, trying to put yet more time back into the game. Quite happy for Pakistan to score quickly because, for them to plod along would have meant that there was less chance of, all of these things that went into the pot that just made it just a staggering performance. And of course the team had to deliver as well, and they did it in spades. If I never see another one again, that's the Test match that I will go to my grave with on an old Betamax. Pretty damn
Not Headingley 2001.
No, forget that. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. But that was unbelievable. That.
I think for me, mentioned it on the pod a couple of weeks ago when we were going through our favourite Joe Root moments, but the gratitude he received from England fans when he got to 3 figures at Bridgetown, I think that will, as we've all said, that what has made this year so special is what it followed last year, and Root was the face of the struggles despite doing so well himself. So I think to him have that moment in front of 10,000 England fans at Bridgetown was pretty special.
Can I just add as a tiny aside on Joe Root? I meant to say it earlier. I'm probably wrong, but I think he'll be a sensation at the IPL. I think he'll score runs where he goes. Bat 3, score at 110, 120 or whatever, and just be 80 not out off 60 balls at the end of most games. I think he's going to be an absolute sensation. Short boundaries, don't have to get big, but he's going to be great.
He's paying to play as well, isn't he? Basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, I think people misunderstand. I think the cricket world misunderstands his quality as a T20 player. He's necessarily sacrificed that side of his career for England. That was the trade-off of being the skipper. I think he's going to be great. He probably won't play a game, but I think he's going to be great. Yeah,
I'll agree with that. He either won't play or he'll be brilliant. I don't think he'll play and do badly. We'll finish off with some moments of the year from listeners. Rode says, Adil Rashid's maiden in the World Cup final, a match-winning moment from a player central to England's white ball success for a very long time. Simon says, the Roses T20 matches always end up being the highlights of my summer. It's incredible how regularly they end up being so good. And then a couple of longer, warm, fuzzy emails to finish the podcast. Guy writes in to say, afternoon everyone, and a massive thanks for the brilliant podding this year. Wisden is the equal first I listen to every week. I'm not sure how that works. And I love watching the video, especially for Yaz's haircuts, Phil's hats, Ben's facial expressions talking about the T10s. It's like having your best mate cricket badgers chatting in the pub every week, which made meeting a few of you in September a delightful bonus. My moment of the year is day 2 at Old Trafford, my first test match this year, the first I saw in person of the McCullum era, and it lived up to the billing. Bairstow and Crawley in a very un-Crawley-like way, and then Stokes and Folkes turning the innings around from 147 for 5. Stokes played such complete innings, from calm accumulation against a fearsome attack to launching into the spinners. Watching him hit Simon Harman into the England dressing room, which was about 20 metres to our right, seemed to symbolise the foot-to-the-floor nature of the England team under him. But it was Folkes' ton that was the sweetest. After bad luck and selection vagaries, he was superb, and as a Surrey fan exiled to Manchester, it was great seeing one of our heroes taking his opportunity. He may not play a lot. Maybe if he was born in the 60s, he'd have played much, much more. But when he does, he's the best we have behind the stumps. Watching that South Africa attack put to the sword, and then finally watching Jimmy Anderson bowl from the Jimmy Anderson end was right up there for me in Test cricket. A game we could have lost, and a knock to our new ethos. We ended up comfortable winners down to that partnership. And I met my hero, David Gower, in the stands at Stumps. Pick that one out. I think that's a great one. And then this is from Tom from Papua New Guinea. A shortest note to say thank you for the podcast. It's a fantastic extra for me every week, and as a father of 3 young kids, combined with a few other podcasts to add to a bit of non-work and non-childcare colour between our daily tasks. On the cricket side, I'm a regular of Cricket Etc., The Grey Cricketer, and your podcast, with Wisden as a favourite among an excellent group of 3. Well done. As cricket becomes more inclusive, with people like yourselves highlighting and helping to set the agenda on topics like racism in cricket and women in cricket, I'm confident that cricket will be something I'll be able to play and enjoy equally with my daughter and sons in the future. Enjoy the Christmas and New Year break.
That's a lovely email, that. That's a gorgeous
really
email.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And the last one is, this is a bit longer, but bear with us because it really is quite extraordinary. It shows this guy basically getting into cricket for the first time. I'll start by apologising for what I'm sure is going to be quite a long email. For background, I grew up in an Indian household in the Middle East and was aware of cricket growing up. I remember bowling awful leggies as a 13-year-old before realising the sport just wasn't for me. Fast forward 15 to 20 years, I've since settled in the US and I'm enjoying calling this country my home. I've been here my whole adult life and have learnt about baseball, the other football, and how to drive on the right-hand side of the road. Back in 2018, I was working closely with a British colleague called Steve, who came into work one day asking if I'd heard about the 481 runs England had scored at Trent Bridge. I was taken with how the normally soft-spoken Steve was buzzing with words such as Bairstow, Hales and Butler, and wondered if I would enjoy getting back into watching cricket. Quickly enamoured by how nuanced and engaging the modern game was, it became my primary source of entertainment. I thought many of my friends and colleagues wouldn't be interested in the game, but I found a select few that humoured me and who joined in watch parties I hosted during the 2019 World Cup. I recall many days of finding reasons to work from home so I could replay the prior day's game in the background. I was productive, I promise. My girlfriend, now wife, even carved out our Sunday morning to watch the final together. She really likes Trent Boult. Somewhere in there, I started listening to the Wisden podcast. I used to drive a lot for work and needed to listen to something that occupied my mind enough to prevent me from sleeping at the wheel. Thanks to your podcast, I was awakened to the depth, emotion and comedy that our game has to offer. I don't think I would have been privy to the World Game if it wasn't for your podcast, and y'all have been a vital catalyst in turning a hobby into a passion. And now this is the really amazing bit. I recently realised that what it was about your show that I've enjoyed, hence the email. I think it's because the whole lot of you have turned into simultaneous friends and characters of what is my own cricket-related personality. Ben with the deepest of cuts from the stats. I'm an aerospace engineer and I promise you, he is one of us. Joe with the common sense we all possess in our proudest moments. Phil with the same flavour and gusto of romanticism with which I try to explain baseball to my increasingly disinterested wife. Yas, who simultaneously keeps the show together but still eggs the best bits on when he senses them, and Butch, who manages to regularly string thoughts together that give me that oh wow perspective every couple of minutes. You've gotten me to become a genuine English Test fan. I didn't know what a Jennings or a Duckett was a couple of weeks ago, but the team has swept itself into my heart, pun intended. Thank you for showing me not only how wonderful our sport is, but also for showing me that it's a human game with real issues and tough stories. This has all culminated in a wonderful way. On my wife's encouragement, we booked a trip to Melbourne and intend on being there for the first 2 days of the Boxing Day test. It's my first ever cricket game in person, and I'm thrilled to be going. Happy holidays. Thanks, Moo.
That is lovely.
That is amazing.
Mark, just for the record,
brilliant.
you still give me oh wow moments as well, right?
Oh God, I'm not gonna sleep with you. I'm gonna do it.
Right. Is this a wrap? Yes.
It is a wrap. Yeah, this is it for the year. Thank you so much to everyone who's emailed in and tweeted in with your moments of the year and all your questions, etc. There's not a break. We'll be back next week covering whatever cricket is on in the next 7 days. Cheers, Butch. Cheers, Phil. Cheers, Joe. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. We'll be back in 2023.